Now it's time to talk to Richard Lawrence. He has written a book called Awakening the Warrior. Ex-Army captain. Hello, Richard.
Hello, how are you?
First off, just give us a bit about your background. What has brought you to writing this book?
Yeah, so I was the operations officer of Task Force Helmand. I spent 9 years in the Army in the infantry. And there's a number of lessons that kind of combat teaches you, that when you leave the Army, you think, well, I want to give something back here. There's extreme experiences that you can have, and you think the lessons that you learn probably need to go back into the system.
Which led you to writing this book. Now, the headline that I got from it, because I've not read all the book yet, but that is that you want to see MMA taught in schools, which is why you're on this podcast. It's why you're talking to us now. Just talk us through the thinking that got you to that point.
Yeah, so I leaving the Army, having had these experiences, I then entered, the normal world. And I was a sales rep for a pharmaceutical industry for a couple of years. And something that really struck me was how people in our soft modern world, and I mean by that comfortable world, which is a good thing in many ways, but they were operating far below what their true potential is. When you see people operating, girls and boys in Afghanistan, you see what people are really capable of. And these are normal people, these aren't like superheroes. And then you think, well, there must be a reason why at the moment we're not developing super resilient, super capable people in the kind of numbers that we probably should be.
So, I mean, you say about the soft life. So that is the fact that people like I'm not necessarily looking at Nick right now. You're not soft, but we're just too many luxuries. We don't get trained in the right way.
Yeah, it's easy, and that's a good thing in so many ways. But you only need to go back to my father's generation. He lived through the war. He worked in a bacon smoking factory in Whitechapel as his kind of early development, shifting 10 tons of pig carcass every day. We're here in Salford. This is an area where manual work was the normal language, whether it was the mills, whether it was the mines, whatever. And there was people who were practically able in every sphere. And that kind of resilience, that kind of robustness, the northern English working class is the backbone of Britain, always has been. But now, because people don't work in those industries, because our lives are more comfortable, then perhaps we are losing something as a result of that.
I mean, we've seen people who've been in the Army go on to have great careers in the UFC and MMA. Jack Marshman is still a serving paratrooper right now. So what you see with your background of being an Army captain, being out in Afghanistan, you were seeing that people who were from normal backgrounds, the fact that they were made tougher through the Army, they were having a tougher experience, they were reaching their potential.
Yeah, and it's about problem solving. It's easy to use the word tough and think, well, what are we talking about here? We're just talking about people who come out the box, pretty rough and capable. No, it's not. It's having resources to be able to problem solve. That's what we're talking about. That's what makes a resilient individual who's capable of chasing their success in whatever they want to do.
So how does that translate to teaching MMA in schools then?
Yeah, well, there's a number of factors why I think it's important. The first thing is that MMA is a form of play. It's a game. And life really is a series of games, and your ability to achieve is based on your ability to play those games, whether that game is the game of business, the game of relationships, I don't know, Game of Thrones, I'm just throwing out games here, whatever. But it's your ability to play games. This is why so many subjects at school are boring. It's because it isn't a game. And all animals, including the human animal, learn best through play. So that's the first thing that we need to get. Second thing is, it is a physical type of problem solving. And the physical bit is really important because your body is the most direct way you have of experience in the world. This is why we call physical work honest graft, because it gives you a sense of what's true. So when you're doing that physical problem solving, you're getting immediate feedback and you know what works and what doesn't work. It's not like an intellectual theory that, can be right or not right and you're not really sure. You know the truth of it by doing it. The other thing that's, I think, really important is that one of the keys to being a good problem solver is knowing yourself. And something like MMA, the challenge of it, gets you to know yourself. I mean, an example of that is, like earlier this week, I had an 18-stone guy sitting on my chest. Right, this was in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Not like in my own time, right? Although each to his own. However, if I feel myself getting frustrated during that and getting angry, that is not going to help me. But I actually recognise that my frustration is starting to develop, which means I can then control it because I recognise what's happening. So this is going to increase my ability to go and solve that problem, tenfold. And not only that, but I get to witness when doing combat sports what other people's emotions are doing as well.
So this is the Awakening the Warrior. Dan, as the only man on this podcast who can call themselves a fighter, I mean, we've tried, Nick and I have. Does that ring true?
Absolutely. Everything that you said is fascinating. I'm actually going to buy your book right after we've had this conversation because you're hitting a lot of points which I find really, really interesting and are somewhat intangible in the sport of mixed martial arts from a commentator's perspective. You know, we always refer to the likes of Khabib Nurmagomedov, you know, the Dagestani fighters as being tough, but what does that mean in comparison to someone that's grown up in California? There was a podcast I was listening to recently with Dan Carlin, and Nick and I were talking about it recently, and there's a beautiful Voltaire quote that is, history is filled with the sounds of glass slippers walking downstairs and wooden shoes walking up. And he talks about how we are on the positive end of that spectrum. We're in the glass slippers walking downstairs generation. But would our children, or would our generation be able to beat, you know, my great grandparents' generation in an even on an even playing field? And these are things that are becoming very apparent to me as a commentator, watching the sport and analysing and seeing how different fighters interact with pressure, react under pressure, and make decisions, good or bad, under pressure. It's all fascinating stuff.
So this is the awakening of the warrior, the inner warrior.
Yeah, that's right, which, you know, I believe is in everybody. But you need the right circumstances in order to bring it out, because the human body, the human animal, is a very mean machine. You know, if you don't do exercise and you keep eating food, it'll save that as fat. But what people don't often recognise is it's true intellectually and emotionally as well. You know, you need to challenge yourself emotionally, or you're going to atrophy emotionally. You know, you're going to die inside in that way. And it's true of using your mental capacities as well. You need to keep challenging in order to bring out the best qualities in yourself.
So to use that analogy, the 18-stone guy sat on your chest, you need to use your brain and your emotions to get around the fact that you've got an 18-stone guy on your chest. And if you do that in an MMA capacity, you can then translate that to life?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the key thing with that example that I gave is, first of all, you need to recognise what's happening to yourself. And then you need to recognise what to do about it, and not allow that emotion to overwhelm you. And that's the real key in how you can control yourself. You know, Dan mentioning there about Dagestan. I read a fantastic article about why, you know, the usefulness of getting those boys involved in wrestling as a way of not allowing them to join terrorist organisations. And there's a really great quote in that where the guy said that, you know, every young man in particular has a desire to want to make a name for themselves. And actually, you know, have some notoriety, develop, you know, dominance hierarchy and all this. And if you don't give them an outlet for that and you let it fester, then the chances are it's going to end up in a negative way. And we see this, I think, in areas where young men want to be drug dealers. Why do they want to be drug dealers? You know, because they see a way of growing up a dominance hierarchy, but it's in a negative way. We challenge people early enough, we get them to recognise themselves in a positive way, then, you know, the chances are we're not going to have that kind of problem.
So if they start teaching MMA in schools, if people, you know, not just teaching in schools, if people of my age or anyone's age start going to MMA classes, how would you see their behaviour changing in the rest of their lives? How will it translate?
Well, the first thing that we want to see is how they're able to control their emotions under pressure. And the great thing about MMA, and particularly MMA in schools and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and other forms of grappling, is that you can start to see these individuals recognise where their emotions are coming from, because they are being challenged. And then when they recognise their emotions, they can start to control them. Not only that, they recognise other people's emotions. The great thing I think about combat sports is that at a time you are connected to another human being. And there's no sort of closer form that you can get in that kind of understanding. You know, you really learn to understand people. We've got guys at the gym that I train in that I know on a really kind of intimate level, you know, in a good way. You know, I really understand where they're coming from because I have grappled with them. And that goes beyond, you know, the kind of nonsense that we can just say to each other in conversation, which can be, you know, a load of rubbish sometimes.
Yeah, there's a gone.
I've heard this play out for real as well right now. You know, at the local MMA gym to me, I was chatting to one of the coaches just this week there, and he said that they'd had an interclub tournament just a few weeks ago. And he said the very next morning, the headmaster of the local school rang me up, and obviously the first thing you think is, oh no, one of the kids have been scuffling on the playground, or, you know, whatever it was. And the headmaster just rang to say, listen, I just wanted to tell you that all, you know, it's in quite a deprived area as well, the gym. And he said, since your gym opened on this estate in this community, the respect from the pupils towards their teachers and to each other has gone absolutely through the roof. He said even the teachers individually are coming up to me and remarking on it. What has happened to this school? What has happened to this community? And he said the only thing I can put it down is that the timeline is perfect. You opened a martial arts school literally 200 yards away from the school building. The in 12 months, the way the behaviour of all the students and everything else, it's transformed the school as well as the local area and stuff like that. That's what the impact martial arts can have. So imagine that if it was actually brought into the school as well and made as part of the curriculum, it could change this entire generation.
Because boxing has long been talked about. The stories, I guess the generation before us, I was going down the wrong path, but then I ended up in a gym and I gave up everything else and I became a championship boxer. There's lots of those stories around it. The problem is, if we put this out into a wider broadcasting context, a lot of people go, well, hang on a second here, I don't want my kids doing that.
And that's a fight. We need to be very clear that it is a hell of a fight that we're going to have with this. But what people challenge me with most of all is they say, hey, aren't you promoting violence? You, Richard Lawrence, you're promoting violence. And I say, no, I'm promoting the understanding and responsibility that comes with knowing violence. That's what I'm promoting. And I'm not going to sit here as somebody who's been in Iraq and Afghanistan and say that, hey, look, all violence is bad, right? Because that wouldn't be sort of congruent to what I've done and what I've demonstrated in my life. But really understanding you're not going to stop violence, right? You're not going to stop those impulses that people have, because it comes from a good place as well in men and women, that desire to protect, that desire to achieve. But you understand it and you know it responsibly. Hey, guess what? You get less violent outside of the gym. All these guys that I fight and spar with, they're not going around, like sucker punching grannies in the street. Of course they're not, because they have a humility that comes with the challenge of facing somebody in a fight.
Fascinating stuff. And I take it the book takes you through that.
The book takes you through it, puts it in context. All of us with a love of MMA, a love of combat sports, we know probably when we watch it that there's something else going on. There's something important about it that we can't quite put a finger on. And the book is there to say, right, this is why it's important.
Are they teaching MMA in the army now? Is there much teaching of MMA, mixed martial arts?
There's certainly Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And one of the guys who's in my regiment, the Fusiliers, Major Seamus Kelly, he runs up the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu side in the army. And they've got some great trainers, some fabulous trainers.
Fabulous. When's the book out?
It's already out. You can get it on a well-known online retailer of books.
Just say it.
On Amazon.
There you go. Richard Lawrence, Awakening the Warrior. It sounds fascinating.